Right, well, hello to all. For those of you that don't know me, as Miles just said, I'm Kelly Bainbridge and I'm the Better Care Fund Project Manager. I work in an integrated post, so I'm held by Middlesbrough Council, but I work across all of the agencies, really around kind of where we can make changes for the benefit of the wider community. And specifically what I'm going to talk to you about today is about the falls prevention work that we've done in South Tees, and a little bit about the whole system change that we've had to kind of go through in order to embed and roll out the strategy itself. Now, there we go. So, for those of you that aren't familiar with the falls prevention process that we've had in the past, for the past 12 years we've had a commissioned service via the CCG, and the Community Trust delivers that. Very much based around people who have had a fall in the community, who then need a level of intervention. And what became apparent when I came into post in April 2017 was that there was a need to review the success of that service. Whilst we'd started out with the aim and ambition of having a proactive model, it become very reactive to people's needs, and the level of demand that was there for the service had meant that people had to have had 2 falls before they could get referred in and be over the age of 65. So just to kind of put that into perspective, when an older person falls, it increased their likelihood of frailty. So when an older person falls twice, that's almost inevitable that somebody will become frail as a result from that fall. So not only does that impact on the system, so we've then got potential hospital admissions, we then have an impact on social care, because that person, once they then come out of hospital, might then need a long-term package of care. But ultimately, and I think most important from where I was coming from, was that this ultimately impacted on people's lives and their independence, and we were actually waiting for them to be in a really serious condition before we then started to do something proactive with them. So we started to think about where we might have had some missed opportunities and where we might start to look at how we could change that model to becoming more proactive as opposed to reactive to the environment. And we went through a number of individual cases that had been referred into the specialist team, and we started to identify that there was opportunities where other agencies would have actually been better placed to work with those people and would have been able to work with them faster. The problem that we had was that we didn't have the ability to inter-refer. So we had a system that was designed where if you're the referrer and you send the referral into the falls team, it stays with the falls team. So in some circumstances, people were waiting up to 10 weeks. And one of the cases that we looked at was an elderly person who had had a fall twice, or triggered for the falls service, and was then waiting for 10 weeks to be seen by a falls specialist. Now, in actual fact, when you looked at the circumstances behind those 2 falls, they were both environmental, and they were both limited to the same location within the home. And that person had no home adaptations. So if we'd have thought a little bit differently about those pathways, and if we'd have had a more joined-up approach, what we would have been able to do was actually put that referral over to another agency who could have been out within 24 to 48 hours. And within that time frame of waiting 10 weeks, how many more times did that lady fall before we actually got out and did something proactive with her? So through that, we identified that there was lots of organisations that were doing lots of different elements of prevention, which could ultimately positively impact on falls. And actually, if we stop thinking about our organisational silos and we start to think a little bit more towards a proactive and whole system change, then perhaps we could get somewhere where we would be more proactive with people's needs, and that's where we got to. So how we got started. So we, like I say, we reported on the currently commissioned service, and we actually went through a process of then looking at, so what is it that our current service is doing and where are some gaps within the system. At the same time, we were applying for some national funding, which required us to kind of put forward an element of match funding. So that made us think outside the box and not just review that one individual contract, but let's think about all of those agencies who have something to do with prevention and what might that look like. And as a result, we started to realise that there was lots of different agencies that were doing lots of different things that were positively impacting on people's likelihood of a fall, but we weren't necessarily joined up or working together that well. And what we really needed was more bang for our buck. We were investing a lot of money into the system, but what we weren't seeing was a massive amount of return for the money that was going in. And that really led us to the development of the South Tees Falls Prevention Strategy. And we knew that, like I say, through the review of the falls service, that there was opportunities for people that would work more proactively, that we weren't identifying any of those people who had a fear of falling. We know that when older people have a fear of falling, they tend to become socially isolated. They don't engage in their community. So we had a whole cohort of people that we were waiting to fall to then address. And then even if they'd had one fall, we then still weren't able to pick them up until they'd had two. But what we equally had was lots of agencies across a lot of different sectors who were coming into contact with these people. So if we started to think differently about our arrangements and our partnership and our engagement, perhaps we could start to have conversations earlier on about falls prevention. So again, we started to think about mapping out all of the systems and thinking about prevention in all its different forms. So we started to think about the home adaptations that we were doing in relation to people staying safe within their own home, or the telecare systems that were identifying when people fell. We started to think about public health and the role that they were playing in all the exercise programmes that they were running, and how proactively, if we were engaging with them, could we actually positively impact on people's physical activity and ultimately reduce their likelihood of falls. We had the fire service going out and doing safe and well visits with people who were doing falls prevention plans, but no idea whether that was successful or not, or whether or not it was positively impacting on falls. So we knew that we had a lot of people that were doing things without width of just health and social care. It needed to be a wider piece of work. And so we started to do a series of workshops with all the different partners that we could identify who were doing some form of a prevention. And that continued to grow. And we got everybody's input in the development of the strategy. We really did want this to be a co-produced piece of work, and it didn't want to be just the voice of the trust or just the voice of adult social care. We knew it needed to be wider, and it needed to be community-based, and it needed to be led by the people who were doing the doing. So that's what we did. We looked at the whole journey that a person goes on in relation to falls. So we know that if people remain physically active within their 40s, they reduce their likelihood of a fall when they're in their 60s. And we wanted to change the mindset that actually getting over at a certain age means that you're inevitably going to fall, and that means you're inevitably going to become frail. Well, that's not the case if we get people to remain active. If we start thinking about the whole journey, not just what can we do for somebody aged over 65, what can we do around prevention, and what can we do if somebody then goes into, let's say, a hospital setting. Their likelihood of a fall massively increases whether they're going with a fall or not. So we wanted to develop a strategy that really covered and encompassed the whole journey that somebody might go on in relation to falls. But that's a lot of systems, and that's a lot of people and a lot of organisations. So it took us quite some time, but in March 2018, we had it approved at exec level that, this was something that everyone was going to be signed up to. So as I said, it is wider than just our adult social care or trust services. We've worked very closely with the VCS sector, and that question of who is involved, it's everybody. It isn't just the people even that are just sitting around the steering group, it's wider than that. Our ambition for this is that it's about everybody in the community taking a responsibility and an interest and an awareness about falls prevention, and what everybody can do to proactively reduce their own likelihood of a fall, or somebody that they care about's likelihood of a fall. And generally, like I say, we don't talk about falls because it's deemed as a dirty word, and older people don't talk proactively about falls because they're going to think that I need help or I'm becoming infirm, where actually, if we talk about it earlier and we do some strategies to intervene, then perhaps we can reduce those falls occurring, and we could certainly reduce the likelihood of the severity of the fall when somebody does. So we knew that it was, like I say, more than just that one commissioned CCG service. So that was the big thing. We needed to change everybody's mindset that falls prevention isn't just about this one team. It is about everybody working collaboratively together. We had no money. We still have no money, so this was about everybody doing change within their own cost envelope, which again means thinking outside the box and doing things differently. We knew that we couldn't do it on our own, and we needed to work with our housing providers. We needed to work with the Stay and Put agency, with the RIT service over in Redcar and Cleveland. As I said, the fire brigade play an important part in getting access to people's homes who wouldn't currently be known to services. We have a vast workforce in the voluntary sector, which we often overlook, who have great influence and access to people who are unknown to services, and let's face it, that's where we want to keep them. We want to keep people independent and empowered. So actually, if we could utilise some of these individuals, if we could start thinking about all of our service users working more collaboratively together, then perhaps we could have a bigger impact on falls prevention. We also thought about TUV and mental health services, and that's often overlooked. Again, we thought about our domiciliary care providers, care homes, basically anybody that was committed to supporting older people that had a willingness to look at their processes and look at an opportunity for change. So this is probably the boring bit, but you know, as with any sort of strategy, I think it's probably important to understand the governance and the structure of how we then got to a point where we were in line with national keeping. So there are requirements like NICE guidance to ensure that you were compliant with that. So we ensured that everything that we were doing was in line with the national directives. We also looked at Public Health England and their documents that they'd submitted around falls and fractures and future commissioning intentions. So we've tried to be future-proof as well as something for right now. We needed to ensure as well that we were aligned to our local governance and structures and steering groups and services that were available. So we ensured that we have regular reporting mechanisms through to the out-of-hospital steering group. We made sure that it was in line with the frailty strategy for South Tees. And ultimately that it was also linked and aligned to the acute falls within the hospital trust. As I said, you know, older people fall significantly when they're in hospital. So we tried to make sure that it was all journey encompassing and all different environments as well. So the important thing was getting the buy-in. And I think one of the biggest opportunities was learning from our past. As I said, this wasn't a new thing, and that was one of the key barriers we initially came up against. But this is what we were supposed to do 12 years ago. That was what we originally set out to do. And we almost had to put a pin in that and say, OK, well, we need to learn from that then. And one of the areas that I think had fallen down in the past and where we'd ended up with a reactive service instead of proactive was the fact that it was deemed as being a special interest. So if you went to the falls steering group, which is key to the development and the outwith of the strategy, then it was probably because you had a special interest in falls. But if you didn't want to go, there was no real comeback. It didn't really matter. And really, it was the trust meeting anyway. So going in, we involved all partners from the outset, and we made sure that everybody was equal partners. We drew up a joint governance structure which sees a rotating chair, so then everybody has a responsibility and an ownership over the actions and the services that kind of come out from the work that we do. We wanted to ensure that we had regular updates into the group, because it's easy to feel as though things aren't really happening, especially when you're stuck in the system and you're doing your day job. Sometimes it's easy to lose focus on sort of the journey and how far you've come. We wanted to ensure that there was sign-up at exec level, and I think that's one of the things that's been really key in this, that we had senior level buy-in and permission to the other agencies who were involved to sort of say, yeah, you can do things differently and let's think outside the box and let's do something for better and for real change. We also expect that every agency around the table then informs and updates their own organisation as a result. So we have clear communication plans and updates that go into their own team meetings, and I go along and speak to them as well. So we make sure that people are informed of what's going on, because whenever you do any type of change management, especially whole change, there's nothing worse than the operational staff feeling as though it's being done to them as opposed to them being part of the process. So we've tried to breed that into this as we've gone forward as well. So we set out our vision, which was ultimately to have an integrated falls prevention strategy to reduce the number of people falling across South Tees by establishing an integrated falls pathway. And that's no tall order, that's quite a significant piece of work in itself. Just trying to get everybody to agree what it is that we're there to do, especially with their own organisational constraints and barriers. To enable any older person, regardless of gender, ethnicity, culture or disability, who is at risk of falling or has fallen, to have access to appropriate standardised assessments, high quality treatment and support from a wide range of service providers. So again, that was about people changing their referral pathways. That was about people thinking differently about the type of people that they would be working with, where traditionally this wasn't necessarily what people were doing on a day-to-day basis. I won't go through all of the aims and objectives, but essentially we set out some really clear aims as part of the group that we would all agree to work towards and that we would be benchmarked against as a result. And I think one of the most important ones was making every contact count. We have professionals who come into contact with older people every day but don't talk to them about falls prevention because they don't see it as being part of their role. So actually, if we upskill people and we do a little bit of training and awareness and support for those individuals, can we start to engage and proactively converse with older people about their likelihood and risk of falls, and where possible mitigate the risk whilst they're with their individual. We agreed that we would develop an integrated care pathway, so we would have a single referral route. And again, that was a big change for organisations when they've all previously had their own right and remit to say, yes, we want this person, and no, we don't want that one. So again, we got agreement that people would think differently about those referral routes. And commitment from all the organisations that they would upskill their own staff and team to have an increased level of falls awareness, and that they would actually go out and have conversations with people about falls. We set ourselves some clear objectives as well, which I think was really key in getting everybody to agree. I think one of the biggest things that we've tried to set out and do is to develop an online resource that everyone's bought into, an online training resource that individuals can access themselves if you're an older person, or that as an agency you can go through and do it with the individual. So ultimately we start to see increased brand awareness a lot around our own community about falls prevention, and that we start to think differently. We very much thought about the work that had been done around safer places, and that if you see that symbol in a window, you immediately know that actually that's a safer place, that person's got training or awareness. That's to do with, you know, for me, if I've got a learning disability or I feel vulnerable. And actually we wanted to have something very similar with falls awareness, so that we could then have something branded that if an older person sees that, they know that organisation is committed to falls and falls prevention work. We set ourselves some targets as well, because it is about benchmarks. But I think the most important one for me up there is about the improved patient experience, because we've got people, like I say, who we were waiting to fall twice before we would pick up and do anything with. And what was really important, and I think what we try and remind people of on a regular basis as we go through this work, is the fact that this is about people, and it's about change for people, and it's about us doing things better and differently, because we want to improve people's lives. Yeah, we want to reduce on hospital admissions, and we want to reduce on the seriousness of a fall and the long-term effect for an individual, but ultimately it's about them having a better quality of life as well. I'll just quickly click through to this. This is the tiered approach that we've come in with. So as you can see, it's very much based, the foundation is around our tier 1, so that's our voluntary sector and services. That's about all our frontline staff who have access to older people, receiving the appropriate training to be able to go out and talk confidently to older people. Tier 2 is around our statutory services. That's where I said about making every contact count. If you're in front of your GP, why we're not talking about falls. If you've got a district nurse, have you got access to a falls prevention plan? It isn't just about that tier 3, which you can see is the smallest part. It's actually about all of those other foundations being key. But as I said, you know, you're talking about sort of 30 organisations that we had to convince to do things differently, and over 2,000 staff members that were then talking about going out and talking proactively with people, which they've never been asked to do before. So the commitment from the ground staff, from the senior levels, it's been outstanding, it really has. And we've already started to see some significant changes as we've gone through. So that's just a little bit on the journey so far. I think some of the key things that we've been able to do, as I said, is around the self-branding, the online resource. We very much want this to be accessible to all. We've had some significant changes around our pathways already, and that single point of referral. And we're starting to see now that older people who previously wouldn't have got access to a service because one didn't exist, we've actually been able to change that, and we've got a number of people who are benefiting from having access to those conversations. We've got a pilot project that's going to run with the VCS sector and one with the community matrons, so we can compare and contrast. But again, I think the big thing for me was that whole system change does take time. It is about kind of working everybody together, and it only works if everybody's bought in. And the need for those regular updates and meaningful outcomes and achievable timescales, because it's very easy to then start thinking we're not moving anywhere or it's too hard. You need to be realistic with the work that you're doing. Ensuring that everybody's involved and participating, because that's been key. We didn't want people just sitting there looking blankly and not participating or feeling as though they were part of the process. And we certainly didn't want anyone to feel as though it was being done to them. We wanted them to feel as though they were shifting the change themselves. We have regular feedback on the successes and the achievements to date, so again, people feel as though they're part of that and feel as though they're actually making some progress, but ultimately reminding people of why it's needed, and which is about having access to services for older people in South Tees that keep them safe and a better quality of life. And that's everything from me. Thank you.